Okay, let's start. Good day, everyone. Dear friends, dear colleagues, welcome, and you're very welcome to the next webinar organized by Danube Water Program, which is cooperation between the World Bank and IAVD, which we already for 9 years running from Vienna. The previous one was dealing with the issue of drinking water directive. This time we decided to focus on what is happening, where is the process of evaluation and review of the urban wastewater treatment directive. The whole objective of this webinar is essentially in really short format. This is going to last not more than 1 hour 15, 1 hour 20 minutes to present most recent development in the aspect of water legislation that's impacting Europe, European Union, but also our region, Danube region in general. A few housekeeping rules. This session will be recorded, and this recording will be, of course, available, and as well as the presentation will be accessible to you on the Voice of Danube website of IAVD. You have a chat box and Q&A box. Chat box is basically for interaction among the different participants. Q&A box is essentially to pose the question to the panelists. Please note that you are muted. So, I mean, you yourself cannot talk. So any kind of communication from your side need to come from the chat box and from the Q&A box if you have any questions. Format is fairly simple. We'll have one main presentation followed by the short panel discussion, and then we will open floor for question and answers. Altogether, as I said, 1 hour 15, 1 hour 20 minutes. Before I go to each of individual presenter and the panelists, let me first introduce myself. My name is Stjepan Gabrić. I'm Senior Water Supply and Sanitation Specialist of the World Bank, already working, I think, 18 years here in the region. And my sincere pleasure today is to present our key presenter today. It's Nele Rosenstock from DG Environment, and our three panelists, Bernard Vallet, Danko Biondic, and George Konstantin, who are all, I believe, those of you who are more involved in the region and development in the region know these people already. So I believe we managed to bring you a really representative group of speakers, as well as the panelists who have something to say about urban wastewater treatment directive. Before I give a floor to Nele, just very briefly my own views. As you know, Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive was accepted in 1991, and it's basically a key piece of urban wastewater legislation of European Union. It's one of the oldest EU directive, and it's one of the most expensive. I heard actually it's the most expensive, but I cannot vouch for that. Directive considering the costs of compliance with directive. Since this is directive which is almost 30 years old, time has come to look at how this directive could be reviewed and, let's say, modernized. But let me not go into too much details and give a floor to Nele. So Nele, thank you very much for finding time to join us and to present from the side of European Commission and DG Environment status of evaluation and review of urban wastewater treatment directive. Thank you. Your floor.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you for having me and for having invited me to this webinar. It's always super nice to present our work. As you said, it's a very old directive, and we're working very hard on it right now to make it fit for the future. And I'll share my slides to show how we do that and also where we stand in the process. As always in these meetings, I will ask you if you see my screen. I think I'm way too far in the presentation. So here, that's the starting point. And before I go, let me put this aside as well. So before we go into the wastewater treatment directive, and as you said, it's a very important directive of EU water legislation. Let me paint you the bigger picture of water legislation in the EU, because this directive is certainly not the only one. We have lots of them out there. And on the on the left-hand side, you see one of the broadest one that we have. That's the Water Framework Directive from 2000. So a slightly younger directive than our Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive. And it has also been recently evaluated and checked. Evaluated means in Commission speak that we assessed whether it's fit for purpose or not. And we found that overall, this Water Framework Directive is actually working quite well. It just needs to be implemented much more and way further, and that it might be reviewed later at a later stage. This directive comes along with a number of daughter directives, first of all. These are the Groundwater Directive and the Environmental Quality Standards Directive, also very important directives. And they are actually now also up for revision. Not entirely, not like our wastewater treatment directive, but more in the sense that we will look at the substances that they cover and try to update them to more recent standards. Then we have the Floods Directive. I'm not going to go into that one, but I'd like to highlight the Sewage Sludge Directive as well, which is an even older directive than the urban wastewater one from 1986. It is also currently being evaluated, so checked if it's still fit for purpose. The Bathing Water Directive, younger, but also being evaluated. And then we have a number of new directives, so where we work now hard on implementing these, and that's the Water Reuse Regulation and the Drinking Water Directive, which you discussed in your last webinar. So this is the complete section of water legislation that we have, all at very different stages. You see also then the Industrial Emissions Directive, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. So on EU level, we really try to cover it all and to make sense and make sure that our environment, our aquatic environment, is well protected. Now I try to switch, cannot go on. So what is the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive about? It's actually a quite nice and simple directive. I think it's around 20 articles, which it's rather short. And if you, even as a non-expert, if you read it, I think you can quite quickly understand what this directive is about and what it is meant to achieve. So the overall objective is, of course, to protect the environment from urban wastewater discharges. And later it was also clarified in a court case that it does not only mean the natural environment, but also human health. So very, very important. And then the directive basically covers the collection of urban wastewater. So all agglomerations that are of a certain size, above 2000 PE, have to collect their urban wastewater. And if they cannot do so because of various circumstances, they can make use of individual or other appropriate systems, IAS, meaning these are individual systems that could be septic tanks, but also very small treatment plants. Then we have the treatment requirements. All agglomerations above 2000 PE have to treat their urban wastewaters before it is discharged. And then in larger agglomerations that are discharging into certain areas, such as areas that are eutrophic or bathing water areas, have to do a little bit more, or maybe a little bit is an understatement. They have to make sure that these sensitive areas are also protected from the urban wastewaters. And in eutrophic areas, that means nutrient removal. And then at the last, as the last part, we have some monitoring and reporting requirements on urban wastewater treatment level. That means we need to know what kind of treatments are being employed and whether these treatments are well working, well performing. And member states have to report to the European Commission every 2 years to what extent they have implemented the directive and where they stand in terms of compliance. And then we publish information and say, look, you stand here and there, more or less, often more has to be done to implement this directive. And now, before I go into all the evaluation and impact assessment process, let me quickly shed some light on where we stand in terms of implementing it. Here you see a nice EU map on the implementation. It is on the collection requirements, Article 3. And what is always good to see is that most of it is blue. Blue means that the distance to target, so target means the collection of all urban wastewaters that need to be collected, is almost achieved. And that's the case in most of the countries. So that's very good news. Then we have the same kind of map for secondary treatments, so biological treatment. And here we see that the picture already gets a bit more diverse. Most parts are still blue, I would say. I think in terms of percentages, we are here still in the 90% overall of compliance on EU level. But we also see that some regions and also some member states entirely need to catch up and need to do a little bit more to comply with this requirement of the directive. And if we then skip ahead and look at more stringent treatments, so Article 5, the picture is even more diverse, and we see that some other colors than just blue also pop up here and there. and more countries have to do more, and meaning they have to make sure that they actually meet the requirements of removing nutrients. What is interesting to see, I think, is that we don't only have one certain type of member state that needs to do more. It's really very diverse member states that are just not there yet. We have the big countries like Spain, Italy, France, also some countries that are more new to the EU, Romania and Bulgaria, that need to do more, but even some of our usual best practice cases like the Nordic countries, Sweden and Finland, where we usually say they are quite far advanced in everything environmental protection, they also need to do more. So this is definitely something to be kept in mind also when we are now reviewing and then revising the directive over time. The evaluation of the directive. So Stipe told me that I really need to provide some context, because we do at the Commission speak sometimes in our own language and it's not always entirely clear. So here I try to put together what do we mean with an evaluation and how do we do it. First of all, why? Why do we check our legislations? It is simply we can decide so based on age, for example. Here we said it's a 1991 directive, and probably even in the wastewater sector, things have moved since then, and we should see if the directive is still fit for purpose. Maybe things have changed and we could adapt it more and make it even better. And then also we need to check that it is in line with new ambitions. And that's very important, I think, right now, because since 2019, we have Ursula von der Leyen and her European Green Deal that require us, of course, to protect the environment even more, but also to, and more importantly, even to protect our climate. And there, the wastewater sector also needs to play its role. Any evaluation has a very certain way of being done. We're doing that according to the Better Regulation Guidelines. It's a 400-page document that explains in detail what we need to do to prove the fit for purposeness of the directive. We follow 5 criteria: effectiveness, efficiency, coherence, relevance, and EU added value. I will briefly talk about them in the next slides. And then in the end, what are we doing with the results? The results basically go to our hierarchy, and our hierarchy decides whether the evidence shows that we should keep the legislation as it is, because it might be already fine and fit for the next decades, or maybe there's enough reason to actually revise this directive. And in our case, the decision was to revise it, and I'll show you the basis for this decision. So, of course, the evaluation, just to put it also in perspective, we took 2 years to carry it out, lots of stakeholder consultations, including an online consultation, workshops, conference. We worked with our joint research center a lot to model the effects of the directive. And in the end, I think if you read all the documents related to the evaluation, it's more than 1,000 pages. So here I try to summarize it really in just a couple of slides. On the left-hand side, you see here, we try to assess the effectiveness of the directive by looking to what extent organic matter loads have been reduced over time. And if you look at the orange bars, which show the situation in the 1990s, so right before the directive was adopted, they are everywhere quite high compared to the blue bars, which is the situation today. Today meaning 2014, because that's the data that we had available at the time of the evaluation. And then if we look at the gray bars, we also see that there was already a steep decrease in the loads of BOD, but even more can be done in a number of countries, reflecting, of course, then that we are not at the stage where this directive has been fully implemented. And then we tried to assess also how these actions had an impact on our environment, because the ultimate aim is, of course, that we have better protection of our water bodies. Here I picked an example of bathing waters, which are, of course, very important to protect also for environmental purposes, but also for tourism, for example. And we see a quite steep increase in the excellence of our bathing waters and the good parts, so the blue and the yellowish part over time, and that we really achieved a lot with our directive. And we believe this and the other evidence that we gathered showed that our very simple and straightforward directive delivered on its objective overall. We also try to assess the costs against the benefits. This is a very important requirement to be done at EU level. We always have to do it for all the directives. And for our directive, as Stipe already said, it is a very costly directive linked to its needs of infrastructure. So an infrastructure can be assessed in terms of cost. We use the feasible function that was established with the COE and the OECD. So even a well-established model was available. And we found that the costs are about 19 billion per year. And then we tried to assess the benefits. And that proved much trickier than the costs, because how to differentiate all the different benefits, which legislation does what, and they are very local specific often. So that was a tough job. But overall, we found that the benefits definitely outweigh the costs in the overall picture. But I think if we asked anyone, is it worth treating our wastewater? Is it worth collecting our wastewaters? The question is always yes, and we would not even need such a benefit assessment. The question is later on rather how to do it, when to do it, to what extent. So the more fine-grained parts behind all this. In parallel to evaluating our directive, we also worked a lot with the OECD over the past 2-3 years, and we still do it right now. And we tried with the OECD to assess the investment needs in the water supply and sanitation sector. It was for us important because we needed to understand what amount is still left. Is the question really money, or are there other reasons? And how can we move ahead even though the directive is not fully implemented? And the OECD found out, based on their modeling, that there is indeed quite a big gap of 253 billion that still need to be spent until 2030 to make sure that this directive is fully implemented. But we also found that overall, it's going in the right direction. Many member states are already pursuing good strategies to implement the directive. Some have to do quite a lot more, and those we visited then in workshops and tried to discuss how further implementation can be reached. And often the answer is not only further money. Money, of course, always plays a role, but it's often also about project preparations, technical capacity, administration. There are many factors coming together to make sure that this directive is well implemented. And we also looked at affordability, because on our level, and I think also on any member state level, it is very important to make sure that any of our legislations does not hurt the affordability of water services. That's very important. And here we see how the current water supply and sanitation sector is affordable, and there is no one clear threshold of saying 3%, that's the magic number. It could be 3%, 4%, that is acceptable. But overall, we see here that in most member states, the situation is quite all right. We see also there are some outliers where the poorest 5% pay more of their household income than they probably should. And here, different actions also on member state level are then needed. But we can also look at this picture and see that in a number of member states, actually a bit more could be spent on household level to make sure that our waters are protected, because we all benefit afterwards from clean waters. And therefore, this picture sends really two messages, I think. On the one hand, we need to make sure we protect the poorest, but we also can maybe see some leeway to increase some tariffs in some countries. And here, yet again, a quite full slide. I will be brief about it, but still try to capture the main messages. Here we try to show what we think remains to be done. The directive we think is effective, but there remains some areas where we need to do more. And on the left-hand side, you see in this colorful and actually Belgian flag graph that more needs to be done in terms of further implementing the directive. That's the red part across BOD, nitrogen, phosphorus, and coliforms. More needs to be done in terms of controlling our individual systems, so the septic tanks that in some member states are used very abundantly and not always fully controlled. Then in yellowish, you see here the small agglomerations where we know, according to Article 7 of our directive, that they should have appropriate treatment, but we don't actually know what is happening because there are very little or no reporting requirements. And we know in some member states, these small agglomerations do as much as the bigger ones do. In others, that's not the case. So we need to have an eye on that. And then lastly here in gray and black is combined sewer overflows and urban runoff, two items that will become more important over time with more of us moving into cities, more impervious surfaces, which leads to more pollution into our water bodies. And then on the left-hand side, I just put together some keywords that we're also looking into. That's contaminants of emerging concern. So we want to look into how to deal with micropollutants under the directive. We also found that the energy use of the sector is quite high. It is 0.8%, so 1%. Doesn't sound super impressive, but actually it's the public sector that consumes most energy compared to all other public sectors. And on top of that, we know that there are quite a lot of wastewater treatment plants already being energy neutral or even producing energy. So there we want to explore a bit what more can be done. And then, of course, sludge management. And as I said before, we have another directive on that, the sewage sludge directive, and we're working very closely together to understand how we can improve that on EU level. So now trying to move forward to the impact assessment phase. So basically, what do we do with all these findings? Usually I present the evaluation only with this slide in a very short form. What are the lessons learned? Effective, it worked. Benefits outweigh the cost. What are the rooms for improvement? You see it all here. And we announced then in July last year that we have the political agreement to carry out an impact assessment. An impact assessment is a mandatory stage before we can come forward as Commission with a proposal to revise the directive. And the objective is, of course, of doing this now is to address all the areas of improvement that we have uncovered, to also align it with the new ambitions, so meaning the Green Deal and all the different strategies that came from it, and then to ensure that it is fit for the future. And fit for the future really means for us not fit for 2025, but for 2040 or 2050. So we are really adopting a very long-term thinking here. I'll be brief on this because this is more a way of showing of how we carry out an impact assessment. It's a complex process where we need to do a lot of things, which is good because we're required to gather really all the evidence to prove what way forward is the best. And we start by considering what policy measures could we take to improve the areas that we have uncovered as not working well. And I will talk about them in a second a bit more. We are working out the methodology then, how to best assess it, because as you can imagine, probably assessing anything on EU level is always quite tricky because we often don't have very good and consistent data available, and we need to make the best out of it or make sure via good data collection that the data that is missing, that we gathered throughout the process and then build our assessment based on that. On top of that, we carry out quite a lot of stakeholder consultations. We started last year already with quite a bit, and soon the next really big step, and I worked on it this morning, is the online public consultation. I'll talk about that at the end and how you can participate in all this. And then at some point, we as Commission kind of turn in more insight and talk between us based on all the evidence and all the stakeholder views that we've gathered and try to analyze it, draft a document and say, this is what we think does the data point us to. And then we draft a proposal, a legal proposal based on that and publish it. And ideally we do so by the beginning of next year. So quite a long way still to go. These are the preliminary ideas for policy measures. And I put a disclaimer on top of my slide here, just to be clear that none of this can be taken as final. This will not be the final legal text. It's more, we're sharing in quite a lot of fora and workshops and webinars what we think can be done. And these ideas are changing over time because we're getting a lot of feedback, a lot of very valuable input. And that means we are able to fine tune and clarify a lot of ideas that we have in mind. Let me go through it from left to right. Starting with remaining pollution, so how we want to address pollution coming from stormwater overflows, urban runoff, small agglomerations, and individual systems. For the first two, stormwater overflows and urban runoff, we are thinking about a requirement for agglomerations to set up integrated management plans for collecting systems. So we really want to trigger more strategic thinking about how to deal with these overflows, because we're aware that in some agglomerations, they don't even know the number of overflows being installed and the frequency of them happening, the volumes, etc. And having integrated management plans could help already to think more strategically about this. Another idea, in combination probably with the integrated plans, is to set EU standards. For stormwater overflows, could be that we say this amount of frequency is acceptable, or these volumes, or other standards like that. For small agglomerations, we are considering if we could not set the current threshold of 2000 PE a bit lower, maybe to 1000 PE or 500 PE, depending on our analysis. And then for individual systems, we are thinking about also a more strategic approach that member states would be required to have a registry of all their IAS, that we should improve probably the standard that exists already for these individual systems, and that member states also would be required to inspect the IAS if that's possible. Depends, of course, also on the amount of them present. All this could go hand in hand with a risk-based approach, together with derogations, because our overall aim is, of course, always to ensure that the Water Framework Directive objectives are met, meaning all water bodies have to be in good status. So we could imagine that if a small agglomeration somewhere does not pose any harm to the Water Framework Directive, then we say, okay, no problem, nothing more needs to be done. This is already being controlled. Let me move on to coherence with other legislations. So here we're addressing two items. One is eutrophication and the other one is industrial discharges. I didn't mention that before, but let me come to it. First, on eutrophication. Here we're thinking about amending the way sensitive areas are being designated. Sensitive areas are not really coherently designated at the moment. We don't really see a clear red thread behind how it is done by all the member states. So why not use the information from the Water Framework Directive and the Marine Strategy Framework Directive to say, look, we know the Baltic Sea, the Black Sea, they are very eutrophic. Overall, these should be always seen as sensitive areas, because we also know that the problem of eutrophication will not be fixed within the next 2 years, but will take a longer time. Then we are thinking about setting stricter standards for nitrogen and phosphorus. On the one hand, to meet, of course, the objectives of the Water Framework Directive, but also we know that a number of member states already do more to meet the objectives, and it's technically possible. Probably we will need to differentiate quite a bit between nitrogen and phosphorus, where for phosphorus it's more easily feasible, and nitrogen it is more complex. This again could be also combined with a risk-based approach, where we say, if the objectives of the Water Framework Directive are already met, then there is no problem and we can go ahead. And then here, pre-treatment and permits for small and medium enterprises. This is in relation to industrial discharges. So we have already some requirements in our directive on industrial discharges. They are not super clear. We need to clarify them together with the work that colleagues do on the Industrial Emissions Directive. And we are thinking about maybe increasing the pre-treatment requirements that are not very clear yet, especially for the small and medium enterprises. I think they are non-existent, and maybe also require some permits in this domain. But here, the evidence base is much more shaky, and we're still trying to establish the extent of the problem, actually. Then we're almost through new pollution. New pollution means for us micropollutants that can be found in urban wastewaters. And here we're thinking about setting EU thresholds on performance indicator substances that would trigger the uptake of the fourth treatment in probably first in the largest treatment plants, could be 1 million PE or 500,000 PE. And these treatment plants would then need to meet fourth treatment requirements. And the smaller ones, we could use maybe a hotspot approach, similar to what is already being done in the Netherlands, where they measure in the water bodies and then take action based on the monitoring results. Given that this dealing with micropollutants is very costly, and given that we already said that this directive is very expensive, we are thinking about how could we use maybe the polluter pays principle to make others, maybe industries, also responsible here to bear some of the costs. And I think I have a slide on that, and we'll talk about that in a second. Fit for the future. This is really about energy and greenhouse gas emissions and sludge. So for energy, we're thinking about requiring all treatment plants of a certain size, probably the larger ones first, to carry out regular audits to estimate or to monitor how much energy they're actually using. And then based on these results, to reduce their consumption over time. We could also think about a requirement for the very large plants and where it's possible to produce energy, because it's already possible, and it would also put the sector more in the spotlight of the Green Deal and move us in the right direction in that sense. For greenhouse gases, we're thinking about similarly setting reduction targets if that's possible, or at least requirements to improve the performance of certain technologies over time. In terms of sludge, which is not really super in the remit of the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, we're thinking about requirements that would help to track and trace pollutants that come through the collection system into the treatment plant and that cannot be removed easily, that would end up in the sludge. And if that's the case and the sludge is meant to be reused in agriculture, then we need to make sure that we find the source. So here it's really a prevention measure. We would say, find the source of these pollutants that you cannot easily take out if you want to use your sludge in agriculture afterwards. And then on phosphorus, we're thinking about setting requirements for minimum recovery, given that we also know that phosphorus is a rare, it's becoming more and more rare in the EU, and we should probably do more either in the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive or in the Sludge Directive. And then lastly, on governance, we really want to trigger more planning thinking, more strategic thinking about how to implement this directive. It's for all the different items, really to think through how to do it. We also want to discuss what are the reasonable deadlines to implement all this, because quite a lot of the requirements that I just, or suggestions that I just presented will take some time to implement. We want to update the monitoring. We want to make use of digital solutions where that's possible. We also really want to move away from the reporting, which is at the moment very, very outdated. Basically, member states report and then every 2 years, and then 4 years later, that's the case for the 10th report, the Commission publishes a report on much outdated data. And that's not acceptable. We want to move to a more digital format. And then lastly, also increase transparency so that the public has access to the information that they are interested in. Yes, okay. Let me come almost to an end with some overarching considerations here, because I think I put a lot on you right now. It's just to say these are all ideas, and for all, we are considering what is the best control at source versus end of pipe, where we know control at source is often preferred, but it's also much more difficult to do. So we need to be selective where it's possible, and where we know it can be done, we should do it. Otherwise, we definitely also need to take action end of pipe to protect our environment, to make sure everything is fine in that sense. Then the risk-based approach and EU targets, probably they can be combined quite well. We know that the implementation of the risk-based approach, especially when it comes along with derogations that somebody needs to assess and then accept, can be quite tricky. EU targets can be very harsh. So a combination is probably a good way forward. Then that goes in line. We always need to think for all the policy measures about whether they're implementable on local level in the end, so where our directive is really put in place, and whether they're enforceable, so whether we as the Commission can actually follow up on them and make sure that they have been implemented in the right way. Then I've mentioned that before, fit for the future and appropriate deadlines. We need to adopt a long-term thinking. Nothing of what I've mentioned would be needed for tomorrow, but we're thinking about the long-term 2040, 2050. Then investments. Here, as I said, we want to consider how the polluter, how some industries like the pharma industry or the personal care products industry could maybe be made responsible to pay part of the treatment costs to remove their micropollutants in our wastewaters. And then also for other areas, to always make sure that we invest where it makes sense, to really focus here. And then lastly, and that's a priority on EU level, and any impact assessment needs to do it, we need to reduce administrative burden on member state level, but also on our level, and make sure that that is at the right level. At the same time, we need to make sure that all relevant data is available when we need it. And now, this is my last slide, I think, and I'm also slowly losing my voice. How to contribute, that's maybe the question on some of your minds. As I said, we are opening soon our open public consultation. Here's the link if you are interested. It's a questionnaire where you can click your way through and provide us also with further information. It will be open for 12 weeks, and I think we will open it by the end of April. We will also have some targeted consultations of member states on the one hand, and then of some specific stakeholders, some more workshops, one coming up quite soon on reporting, then also on sludge and wastewater, costs and benefits, integrated sewer management, etc. And then lastly, a bigger stakeholder conference where we would present our preliminary findings. If you're interested, please use this email to contact us. We have to see how much interest we get for the workshops and if we need to restrict participation, but as long as we stay with the virtual format, we usually try to keep it as open as possible. That's it. Thank you very much. I hope I was not too long and that I provided you with the right amount of information about where we stand in terms of revising and reviewing this directive. Thank you.
Thank you, Nele. Excellent presentation, I have to say. And also I have to make an immediate comment. Regardless how much time and years I have spending working around the directive, I always learn something new. So obviously, this is a topic that will remain relevant for all of us who are water and particularly wastewater professionals for the time. So let me now invite, before I go to the reflection from the panelists, please, any kind of questions that you have, please feel free to post them on the Q&A section of the platform, and then I will of course read them later on. So reflection from our panelists. The first one, we decided to go from west to the east. So we start with Brussels, Bernard Vallet, who is a policy officer in EWA, who also has a PhD in civil engineering, water treatment, and environment. Bernard, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for the new water program to allow me to express Euro's views on this revision of the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, and especially at this crucial moment in time. So as you said, my name is Bertrand Vallet, and I'm a policy officer in charge of wastewater services at Euro. Just for the who don't know who is Euro, this is the European Federation of National Association of Water Services. We represent the National Association of Drinking Water and Wastewater Service Providers from 29 countries, and specifically we have nearly all the countries on the Danube catchments that are our members. So as it was already said, the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive is the core instrument that regulates the wastewater services, and it defined the baselines for the requirements on sewage collection and treatment. So it's an effective and efficient legal instrument, as Nele said, very simple, which is widely implemented. Also, although we can do more, and indeed compliance can be improved, there are a lot of infrastructure already in place across Europe. So we agree that there are some important challenges for the sector that are also aligned with the objective of the Green Deal, which is a very good good thing. So climate change, energy consumption, zero pollution, circular economy, biodiversity, to name a few. And we see the revision of the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive as a good opportunity to develop a new ambitious, innovative, supportive, and straightforward policy framework that will allow us to reach the objective of the Green Deal and to make wastewater collection, treatment, and management fit for the decades to come. However, it's crucial for the sector that any new objectives to be delivered consider also the affordability, as Nele also mentioned it. So it's very important for the water services, and also the long life cycle of the assets and their little flexibility to adapt to new situations. We have lots of geographic differences. The assets are in different states across the Europe, and then we will have to, let's say, apply a range of technologies and management solution. And this is why in the different options that were presented by Nele, we agree that, or we support a lot the risk-based approach and the control at source that allow to the operator to have more flexibility to implement cost-effective solutions. Especially when we start from different points across Europe. So with regard with the specific topic of the revision, we put more emphasis on 4 of them. So the control at source, climate change, the circular economy, and the contaminant of emerging concern, which for us are the let's say, the most important topics at the moment. So the control at source, it contributes to avoid extra energy consumption. Because if you want to remove lots of pollutants, you will have to use advanced wastewater treatment to produce also safe sewage sludge. So you avoid to have accumulation of pollutants in the sludge. And this product can then be fit for the circular economy. And also to maintain access to water at an affordable costs for citizens. Of course, if you need to implement new technologies, then you have the associated cost that will rise a lot. Regarding climate change, we face a lot of consequences with droughts and floods and the change in the rainfall patterns and the increased flow in the combined sewers. And the sector has to respond to these challenges. So we expect the impact assessment to explore solutions allowing the wastewater sector to contribute to climate targets within the Green Deal, but also to have a view on sustainable adaptation of the assets. And when we talk about this, we look more again as reducing the flow that entering the sewer, so promotion of nature-based solution upstream. To really delay the flows in the sewer. In terms of energy, we have to do things, but we think that the sector is already quite efficient, and we want to make sure that strong regulations are not a limiting factor so to prioritize investment on certain topics when you also have other economic sector, when the gain can be better. If we think about mobility or this kind of thing. So we need a bit coherence here. For the circular economy, again, I will recall the control at source. We have lots of resources that can be produced out of wastewater, so nutrients, energy, even cellulose and bioplastics, and of course water. We think that the important thing is to protect the quality of the wastewater, because it's the only way to reach circularity, carbon neutrality, and affordability of the services. Again, the same argument here. And talking about this, and Nele talked a bit about it, we think that we need to protect the quality of sludge, because the application of sludge to land, if we have a well-controlled quality system, is more sustainable and cost-effective than any other solution, and it avoids also greenhouse gas emissions. Finally, for the contaminant of emerging concern, I want to emphasize the fact that end of pipe must remain the last resort. We need to, again, see where the pollution are coming from, and we can have measures either in the urban wastewater treatment directive or in the industrial emission directive to really control the discharge of pollutants into sewer from industries. And it's very good to see that there is a focus on SMEs. We also think that this is a remaining source of pollution that need to be tackled. But we also think that a strong control comes also from the beginning, from the design to the end of life of product that are put on the market for consumer. And we want here to really have a study on the impact of these products on the wastewater at the end, so to control the pollutants at the source. Of course, and this is very good also to see that, if we have to implement end-of-pipe treatments, we think that the whole value chain needs to contribute to the environmental protection and through the implementation of extended producer responsibility. So to conclude, the decision to come will form the second urban wastewater treatment directive and the agenda for wastewater operators for the next decades. We are all here a stakeholder that needs to work together and to have a collecting group to make good choices which will pass the test of time and ensure that citizens across Europe benefit of affordable and sustainable wastewater services, and that the environment is protected. So thank you very much, and looking forward for good exchanges.
Thank you very much, Bertrand. This was very good presentation from angle of your association. Let me now move to Croatia. Danko Biondic, Croatian Waters, my good colleague and friend, basically a reflection from his point of view as well as from the newest EU member states. And I believe the only one that still has a deadline for compliance with Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive that has not expired is the Croatian one. All others have expired. So Danko, over to you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Stipe. First of all, some facts about the implementation of the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive in Croatia, the youngest member state in European Union. First, intensive development of the wastewater collecting and treatment systems in Croatia began even before Croatia became a member of the EU with World Bank loan financing. Croatia has successfully completed the Adriatic project and Inland Water project. During the accession negotiations of the Republic of Croatia for membership in the European Union, transitional periods for fulfilling the requirements of the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive were established until to the end of 2023 for all agglomerations bigger than 2,000 population equivalent, with intermediate deadlines until the end of 2018 for agglomerations bigger than 15,000 population equivalent, and until to the end of 2020 for agglomerations between 10,000 and 15,000 population equivalent. The entire state land territory, the sea area along the western coast of the Istria, and closed bays and estuaries have been declared as a sensitive area. 7 years after Croatia's accession to the EU, today only 53% of the population is connected to public sewage systems, while the connection to wastewater treatment systems is even lower and amounts to 44% of the population, which includes treatment lower than required. The number of agglomerations of loads greater than 2,000 population equivalent is 265, with a total load of about 5 million population equivalents. Water utility companies in municipalities are responsible for implementation of directive in Croatia. Water utility projects are co-financed by the structural funds from the operational program Competitiveness and Cohesion 2014-2020, within which the allocation for such projects amounts to more than 1 billion euros, and by the national sources. The implementation of development projects for wastewater collecting and treatment is delayed in relation to the dynamics determined by the accession negotiations. This delay is influenced by a number of factors: existing organization or fragmentation of the water utility sector, and complexity of infrastructure, water municipal projects, long project preparation, complex standard conditions, complex construction. Due to the large number of projects that need to be prepared and implemented in a very short time with limited human resources, the practice has shown that the deadlines are expected to be extended by 2 to 5 years compared to those from the accession negotiations. The current fragmented water services sector doesn't have the capacity to effectively implement the necessary investments, both in terms of human resources and in terms of affordability of the necessary investments in the existing areas of water services. In order to strengthen the implementation capacity and investment capacity, as well as the financial and technical sustainability of public water service providers, a comprehensive reform of the water services sector has been launched. It's planned to establish about 40 service areas, which will reduce the existing number of public suppliers from almost 200 to about 40. Service areas are established to enable the establishment of a single public supplier capable of sustainable development and maintenance of municipal water structures, rational use of water for human consumption, and efficient implementation of water utility infrastructure development projects while achieving social affordable water prices for users, and after the implementation of planned investments, raising water service standards and consumer protection. Finally, as most of the projects have been prepared today and the Republic of Croatia expects significant financial resources at its disposal from European funds in next period, it is expected that in the forthcoming period, the implementation of water utility projects will significantly accelerate. That's some facts about implementation of Directive in Croatia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Danko. Before we go to George, to Romania, Nele, maybe just one comment from my side. I think I read that in February, European Union has referred Slovenia to the Court of Justice because of the wastewater. Slovenia was supposed to be compliant until the end of 2016. Now it's 2021, and they still have not been compliant in a number of agglomeration, which actually indicates that there is a almost systematic problems because country after country are failing to achieve compliance. At least, I mean, this is my view. So that's a good introduction to Romania, another country that's also struggling to achieve compliance. George, floor to you. And I know George is open-spoken, and open-minded person. So I'm very interested also to hear his opinion.
Okay. Thank you very much. Stipe, I was asked you to start from the west to the east, just to say that, as the previous speakers said, yes, you said for Romania, implementation of this urban wastewater treatment directive is one of the most difficult tasks or commitment which we encountered after the accession. And it's because the costs. We estimated 20 billion euro at the accession point. We have managed to implement projects of about 9 billion euro, but now the EBRD already told us that we still need 16 billion euro, which is which is far from what we have estimated, and will be practically a very important burden on the Romania to implement this. But not, as Nele said, not always the money is the main problem. The main problem is the capacity to implement the project. And in this moment, it's we are facing a negative, if you ask me, a negative phase of the European integration. Many Romanian workers are now working in the western part of the European Union and not in Romania. It's a lack of capacity to implement the project from the construction point of view, and also of capacity as local authorities, which are in charge with the water and wastewater. We implemented a policy during the last, let's say, 11 years, the regionalization, which we consider very important in order to improve the capacity of implementing this project. But even we have increased in the last 14 years, the population connected to the wastewater system with 20%, we still have a lot to do. And it was highlighted by Nele about affordability, and Romania, it's a studies #1 in negative sense, in a way that the poor people have to pay very much for the services. We try to solve changing the legislation, and practically we have provided the possibility that the individuals or family or households which has minimum income per family member to be supported by the local authority from the local budget in order to pay the bill for the water and wastewater. This was, let's say, government response to this situation, which has been highlighted in this study made by the European Commission and OECD. Still, the affordability remain a problem, particularly in the rural area. And as an example, I can give you that we have in this moment the systems built, that series system built for 500,000 of people, but people are not connected. Practically, we will use all the available resources, and the last one is this National Plan for Resilience and Recovery, and we propose already to have a program in which to help even more the let's say, poor family in the rural area. It's called support for the first connection, in order to provide facility in the household, not outside on the public domain. As I said, this will, at least we try to connect also the people which has the pipe in front of their in their house, but they are not connected. This is also an issue for us. In order to speed up the process, because also we have delays in the implementation of the commitment taken at the moment of the accession, we now have a project with the support with World Bank, in which we are trying to find solution. One solution which Bank proposed for Romania is this IIS, Individual Appropriate System. Already Nele highlighted that this could be an issue. And of course, we are very much, let's say, we are trying a solution in order to monitorize and to have the capacity to report the Commission, because this individual appropriate system should ensure the same level of treatment as a wastewater treatment plant. And, you know, being spread on the territory, it's difficult to control from the, let's say, Water and Environmental Authority. However, we are trying solution. We are practically now reshaping the agglomeration. I want to tell you that from Romania left about 3 million people in the last 20 years, and we have to reshape and to look on this agglomeration, how we will build the system. Now, related to this proposal of the changing the directive, I want to tell you that during the implementation of the Water Framework Directive, in many cases, we have had to establish standards more strict than those provided by the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, which means that practically we have been forced to let's say, to be more strict than directive, which seems to be very strange for a country as Romania, but otherwise, and I will give you the example, when you have a quite big wastewater treatment plant, because we are collecting from the rural area and then discharging in the very, very small river. And clearly that river will not reach the good water status. And we have to impose stricter standards for this, which means that we are taking to account this. Sludge management, because it was mentioned, this is a very, very big concern for us. As long as we will increase the number of urban waste treatment plants, we need a solution. I want to tell you that in Romania, the people from agriculture don't want this sludge. They are afraid by this sludge, and also it's about responsibility, because in this moment, the legislation asks let's say the urban wastewater owner to take the entire responsibility of the sludge. Even a disease will happen after 1 year because of this sludge. And even the operators, the water and wastewater operators, they don't want to take this responsibility and to put the sludge on the agricultural land. Also, in this respect, I will say that will be very good, because I understood that also this sludge directive will be changed. When you make changes in the urban wastewater treatment directive to somehow correlate with the sludge directive. Also the basin directive. I have seen the first announcement of the basin directive, and it was mentioned that we will very much concentrate on these microbiological parameters, and mostly they are coming from the urban wastewater treatment plants which are located upstream. I had this discussion with the operators in Romania, but in another case. Practically some water operators complain that the upstream operators are discharging wastewater with the microbiological load very high, and they cannot treat. And when I asked, I said, okay, I'm the Ministry of Environment, I'll put you a standard for the microbiology, because you are complaining one of another. And you know, the response was what to do to chlorinate the wastewater treatment, what will be in the river. Okay, there are different solutions, but this is also a question related between the operators, water operators. We are in this referee, we are trying to find a solution. However, this is a real thing. We consider that, of course, as it was mentioned by Bertrand, affordability and this cost and affordability. This is very important, because if you show that what is the situation in Romania with affordability, what will mean in the future on the more stringent standards and more stringent treatment will be applied. Therefore, we are in favor of application of extended producer responsibility, chemicals and wastewater, and for treatment at source. We could also agree with the risk-based approach, but I will give you an example. In my opinion, till now, the urban wastewater treatment directive was not so much focused on the environment. Why? Because they ask to treat the wastewater, doesn't matter the quality of the receiving waters or the situation. And according with the existing directive, you have to collect and treat. And I'll give you an example with the Danube in Romania. Practically, we are discharging 1 cubic meters of wastewater in an average 6,000 cubic meters as the Danube has. And practically, we have a 6,000 times dilution. Of course, at the end, the load will reach the Black Sea and we have a problem. And for this reason, Romania is entirely considered as a sensitive area. Also, related to the permits for small and medium enterprise in Romania, we have this regulation. The discharge of the wastewater are regulated for all these enterprises. But I think that a new approach will be very good, because always in Romania, when we try to implement something, people are complaining that in the Western Europe, they are not applying this kind of standards, and only us are pushing the economy, are pushing to do more than others. But if it's a clear EU approach, for us will be more suitable. And related to circular economy, I want to, let's say, highlight or underline maybe the connection with the water wastewater reuse, because we have already this regulation, and practically we have to take into account that maybe in the future the water reuse in this moment for Romania is not the case, but we don't know in the future if we will need to reuse the water for agriculture. And finally, it will be very important, in my opinion, timetable to implement this new directive. As I said, we have problem to implement the old one. We are making efforts. The new, at least what will be good also to know, because I already said to operators, which I discussed, take care that the fourth level of treatment will come. Just providing your project place in the location to build the fourth treatment stage. This is all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, George. In principle, we are now open for a Q&A session, and I was now looking at the question already posted. Let me start with one question that was posted, and it's also my personal interest. Sewage sludge and the whole relationship between the wastewater treatment, which of course as a byproduct has a sewage sludge, which sometimes it's a bigger problem than the wastewater treatment plant. So we eliminate one problem, but we create another problem. Sometimes, which is kind of a push conveniently to the background, because it's kind of not that visible. Nela, most recent thoughts, idea about establishing the link and also making advances also on the sludge side beyond the wastewater treatment side.
Sure. I think my answer will not be completely satisfying, because we're in an interesting position. The sewage sludge directive is currently being reviewed, being at an evaluation stage. So we don't even have the green light from our political hierarchy yet to say that we revise this directive. So for now, we can only look at whether it has been efficient, effective, relevant, if it has an EU added value, etc. So I cannot say yet how this directive will be changed. Nevertheless, we announced in the Circular Economy Action Plan that probably there is a need to revise this directive. So it might be upcoming soon-ish, but it might be later than what we do with the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive. Nevertheless, under the evaluation of our directive, we already included some sludge aspects, and since we need to deal with the sludge first, right? It comes to us first as a directive. We do have these ideas of track and tracing of pollution, of better regulating industrial discharges reaching the wastewater treatment plants, various ideas that would actually help to ensure that the sludge is later cleaner, or clean at least in those places where it should be or would be reused for agriculture, because we also know that some countries, including the country I come from, Germany, decided that they will no longer reuse sludge in agriculture, but to go into for incineration. So we are thinking about these links, and we are working very closely with the colleagues, but we're at a very difficult stage in terms of how to do it with the directives. It might be that we need to wait for them until they reach some conclusions. I don't think that we will do that. Or that we decide to do already some of the ideas that I've presented today under ours, which we think are within our remits, and then leave the rest basically to the sewage sludge directive. Because also keeping in mind is that the community that we are speaking to is quite different for us. It's the environmental community, the environmental ministries, whereas for the sewage sludge directive, it's really the agricultural ministries, the farmers, etc. So maybe keeping it also a bit separated on certain aspects might make sense politically for us.
It sounds to me like this whole process of evaluation, revision of link directive, it's, well, I would say almost never ending. I mean, this is going to be continuous evolution of, I can see this going, to the next generation. I mean, we need to give them something to work.
Yes. And usually every new directive now has a review clause. So every 10 years we have to review them. So they will not get at the age of our directive anymore. But also these things change, I think, over time, again and again, of what is required and what not. So yes, continuous.
Thank you. Bertrand, question to you, coming from basically service provider side. Are we still witnessing the trend toward regionalization of water services, and what kind of impact this might have on both of affordability as well as the management?
So we have a very different governance model across Europe. So there is no model that is the best. I think it's really to the member states to decide how they want to organize the services. The regionalization, I don't think this is like, we are services that are very local with local issues, so this needs to remain close to the users. The affordability issues is really related to the level of services that you have, and the political will to solve the cost recovery principle. So most of the time you have like the price of water is something that is very political. And then it's a bit unfair to play with this, because at the end of the day, it's the access to water that is at stake. We still see some examples of support mechanism for the poorest that may solve the issues of affordability for the whole population. And we have some example. We have on our website, we have a report on the governance models with the access to this pricing policy. But I think the the most important thing is that the costs that is invested in the infrastructure can be recovered with the billing, and that we don't play really with this, because this really creates issues for the operators at the end of the day to invest in the infrastructure and to deliver the service they are asked to deliver.
Thank you. This is actually a very interesting point, basically cost of service provision and the cost recovery, which, as far as I know, it's a nice principle mentioned, in all the key documents. However, not really enforced, neither on the national, neither on the EU level as such, particularly when we come to the depreciation of the assets. Because all this investment, and we know that in phase of the harmonization with the directives, is basically to the larger extent financed by the Brussels, yet asset depreciation at the end will come at the cost of water user in individual utilities, right? So how much is this remains elusive goal? How much is this something which might be imposed as the not negotiable mandatory requirement? Whoever wants to pick up the question.
Well, I can start. My mic is on. So I think you're right. The investment part can be helped. So you always have a possibility to invest in the infrastructure. The capacity to pay is really depending. You have certain countries that have a lot of enforcement of the cost recovery, and again, it depends. It really depends on the local governance and on the political capacity to see that what you are not investing today will have to be invest in the future at one point, because your infrastructure will become older without the proper state to be maintained. But this is very, I mean, this is very local dependent. So again, there are part of the Water Framework Directive that ask for the cost recovery. So this should be enforced, but indeed it depends a bit. It depends a bit on the country. For what Euro is doing, we promote a lot the approach of the OECD with the 3Ts, so taxes, tariff, and transfer, mainly to have transparency on how the cost is recovered, because it's often difficult to see how the financing system is done, and you may have tariffs that are lower, but you can have more taxes, and when you have everything under taxes, well, you collect taxes, but this is not resent to the operators. So the treaties allow to have this visibility of how your money is mobilized for the water services.
Okay, thank you. Let's make this also, this whole exchange also useful for Nele and colleagues in DG Environment. So I will ask direct question to George and Danko. Basically, if there is a single point that you would like to see changed different in urban wastewater treatment directive from the standpoint of Romania and Croatia, what would it be?
Yeah, it's very difficult question to put a single point. However, I said that this should be a correlation, a single point which is important, correlation with other directives, and taking into account also the future developments. Because it's important, the correlation, in my opinion, of course, but this is my opinion, not only in the stricter, but also just to take this risk-based approach and taking into account the environmental quality, the status of the water bodies, according with the Water Framework Directive. This, in my opinion, will be very important, because otherwise you will enter, when we discuss with different users and different stakeholders which have different interests, like basin water, yeah, we need to have a correlation, and it's better for us, at least easy for us as a Romanian authority, to have something from Brussels, because you cannot discuss when it's from Brussels, and you say it's from Brussels.
Bella, is this true? Is this really true? You cannot discuss it with Brussels? I don't know.
But I guess it helps if it comes from us, so we are the bad guys, that's okay.
Yeah,
and I think it's really not only true for Romania. I heard it even from my German colleagues.
Okay, Danko, from a standpoint of Croatia, I mean, I said one thing, but if there is something that you would like to see different, that basically would help, in this case, Croatia achieve the objectives.
Main challenges for Croatia in future is, as George earlier said, less agglomerations than 2,000 population equivalent. What we should solve in accordance to requirements of Water Framework Directive. This is issue which we expect to solve with reform of our water utility companies reform, in establishment of so-called service areas, which will cover small agglomerations. Then other challenges also is sludge management, how to deal with it, energy production from sludge. And what's also important for us, appropriate deadlines. because not of lack of money, as George said before, more lack of capacities for implement directive, especially at local levels. That's in short my opinion.
Thank you very much, Danko. You know, we do have a number of questions, and we can of course continue for some time. But I like to keep my promise and stay inside the given time frame. With that in mind, there are questions that are also answered directly in the system, but we'll also work toward answering this question and coming back to the people who asked the questions after the session. Well, with that in mind, I would like to thank our panelists. Nele, maybe last word from your side before we wrap up.
It's a big thank you to you for inviting me, for having me to talk about this, and it's valuable insights really that I can gather via these kinds of webinars or workshops where we exchange honestly and openly. Because yes, we can blame in the end Brussels, but I think it's a joint approach that we should have, and we tried really during this revision process to be very transparent, to share our ideas very early on, because in the end, as you will see in the title of the directive, it does not say Commission directive, it says European Council and European Parliament directive. So it will be up to the member states and to the European Parliament to come to an agreement. And we are just the ones who are coming up with the proposal based on what we hear and based on what we have assessed. So these exchanges are super valuable for us. Thank you very much.
I cannot think about better words to wrap up and finish this event, this short webinar. As I said, we are maybe 9 minutes over time, but I believe this is acceptable. My last point is please stay tuned, register to Voice of Danube, where you can find all the latest information. We do plan to continue with this kind of know-now webinars. We are thinking about organizing one on the sludge management. We are thinking about organizing one on the water reuse, because I mean, once you open this topic, there are new interesting items, new interesting topics are also coming to the surface. So please follow us, continue to follow us. We'll also continue working on providing update on what's going on in the wastewater sector and what are the newest trends and developments. With that in mind, let me thank Nele and all our panelists, and let me thank all the participants who were with us for this little bit less than 1.5 hours. With that in mind, with best regards from Zagreb, thank you for being with us and have a nice afternoon. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.